Good morning. Thank you for joining us here for our session, Digital Dissemination and the Sustainability of Your Scholarly Work. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jay Hickey. I'm a Technology Licensing Officer at Columbia Technology Ventures. Let me try to, is that better?
Yeah.
Try to get closer here. Okay, as I was saying, this is our session, Digital Dissemination and the Sustainability of Your Scholarly Work. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jay Hickey. I'm a Technology Licensing Officer at Columbia Technology Ventures. As some of you know us, CTV. On behalf of CTV, I'd like to thank all of our panelists and CCNMTL for hosting this event, and everybody for joining us here. For those of you who are unfamiliar with CTV and what we do, we're the technology transfer arm of Columbia University. Our mission is to support the research and innovation of Columbia faculty and community, by bridging the gap between academia and industry. Today, for our session, we're specifically going to talk about some of the models and strategies for disseminating digital content. We have three great panelists today to join us. You'll be hearing from them in a moment. The first, going right to left, or left to right here, I'm sorry, is Brian Morton. He's an associate professor of biology and chair of the Department of Biological Sciences at Barnard College. Next is Tim Honaker. He's the Chief Operating Officer at the University of Chicago's Office of Technology and Intellectual Property. And finally, Ben Moskowitz, Professor at NYU's Interactive Telecommunications Program and Media Projects Director of the Mozilla Foundation. So first, I'd like to have each of the panelists kind of come up and give a little bit of an introduction about their work in this space and some of their experiences specific to dissemination of digital content. First, I'd like Tim to come up. In his role as the Chief Operating Officer at the University of Chicago's Tech Transfer Office, Tim is particularly active in education technology and content, especially in the startup space. Tim has a lot of experience as an entrepreneur himself, brings a very unique perspective to the topic of digital education and digital dissemination. So with that, Tim.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. Pleasure. What I want to talk about, what we consider our role at Chicago, and actually we're in the middle of going through a name change, and actually we are soon going to be called the Center for Technology Development and Ventures, and there's a reason for that. We consider our role to be a catalyst to transforming research into enduring products and services where the faculty want that to happen. So what does that mean? I want to talk about that a little bit. This is a book that was published in 2010, Organizing Schools for Improvement, Lessons from Chicago. It was based on over 20 years of data that the university has under its Chicago Consortium for School Research. And this was the penultimate book, was a top 5 read in education on their look at that data and how you could organize schools and what were the essential elements of a school to know if the school is going to improve academic outcomes for students or not. And when that book was published, the director of our Urban Education Institute met with the president and said, "This is really significant work. We need to have this out in the public, and it's not just public policy or publishing. We need these tools that we're developing at this institute in the public domain." So they contacted me and said, "What can we do?" Well, we talked about it, and with the provost's support, we launched a business called U Chicago Impact, where the university is the only limited partner in that business. And you can see that we have some tools, including the 5 essentials. There were some other tools that have been developed by the Urban Education Institute, and the university happens to run a charter school on the south side of Chicago, which has a blind lottery for enrollment, so there's no academic selection, almost entirely African American population, about 2,000 students. Last year's senior class, 100% graduated and matriculated to college, which is about 10 times better than CPS does. So the tools and techniques that we're talking about were developed under U Chicago Impact, or developed by the Urban Education Institute, adopted into Chicago Impact, and we've taken the product, the 5 essentials, and developed it as a product that can be used in the general public. And as of this year, every school in the state of Illinois will be using the 5 essentials product. So that was just something that we worked out with the state recently. And so what the public will be able to see, and you can see that the data shows that on these essential elements, that if you're in the top quartile in 2 out of 5, you're 10 times more likely to improve the academic outcomes for students than schools that are in the bottom quartile. So this kind of report will be available, and it's going to be interactive, it's cloud-based, you can drill down. This is transformational. It started with a book. It started with the book that I showed you. And that's how, through digital means and through commercial dissemination, you can get to something that is truly going to have impact to society and be transformational. In this particular case, it's a nonprofit LLC. All of the, the enduring part of the products and services, and something to keep in mind when you want to create something, is there's a reinvestment, there's a maintenance. You need the ability to keep that funding going post the grant funding running out, post being able to get a foundation to fund some work. Now this particular business, Chicago Impact, started with the university doing this. It's raised almost $3 million in philanthropic funds since its launch, because the foundations have said, I like this. This isn't about just research that's stagnant. This is about research that's going to actually impact the public. And so there's been tremendous support behind these tools, this development. And that's the kind of thing that can happen when you think about that in creating the products. This is a book. It was written by 3 of our faculty members. One in particular, Scott Stern, is the Assistant Dean of Technology and Medical Education. He runs the clerkship. This is a very popular book for third-year medical students. It's about clinical reasoning. Scott has a burning passion about medical education. And those of you who are in the room who know medical education, hours got cut back for students. Insurance companies are turning people away at the door. And he would say, as a doctor, he learned to be a good doctor by following a really good doctor around and figuring it out. That doesn't happen anymore. Students don't see enough. His data shows that 1 in 8 patients is misdiagnosed. So Scott wanted to develop tools that would allow students to get some of that experience they just don't get today. And he was really after a simulated environment where a patient would come into your office with a symptom, and your job was to start the whole process from the beginning, knowing nothing about that patient. And he would talk about this, and he said, when I was in class, people would teach diseases, and then I went out in the clinic, and no one ever walked in with the yellow sticky that said, I have cancer. They would say, my bones ache, I'm fatigued, something is going on. So it's very important to him that it be a real environment, simulated. And we went down the path and actually found out that's a heck of a lot harder than we thought, to actually create that kind of environment. So the first thing he did is he took his analytic approach to teaching clerks how to think about symptoms. And by the way, he has phenomenal data. Every disease that could be associated with a symptom, what's the prevalence, what are the tests, what are the reliabilities, whatever. And he took that and worked with an MBA team who created a business challenge, entered the business challenge, won, went to the Silicon Valley, and did really well in a couple of incubators out there, have raised over $2.5 million, and have a company called Agile Diagnosis, which is taking his work out. Right now there's over 12,000 medical students who are using the application. Then we actually did find a company who had been working on a very similar idea, who loved the idea of including the analytics that Scott did into their package. And we happen to have at the University of Chicago a person named, one of our faculty members, Vinay Kumar, who's a senior editor and writer of Robbins Pathology. He took a look at it and said, this is what I've been waiting for. This is the coolest platform I've seen, and is working very actively to help us scale it up and take it to India. He's really particularly interested in giving back to India. So that's what I mean by enduring products and services. You know, you have to have a funding model. It could be profit, it could be nonprofit, it could be anything else, but really getting it out there and transformational, because it's not research or ideas. Textbooks are static. What we have the tools now is to transform that into something that can really have serious impact, and it can be global. The nice thing about it's very easy to buy cloud-based resource. Once you develop the applications, you can think about a global marketplace for your research. And that's what we're trying to do. I know that's what Jay and the team here is trying to do, is help you make that happen. Next.
All right, thank you, Tim. The next person I'd like to call up would be Brian Morton. As I mentioned, he's an associate professor of biology and the chair of the biology department at Barnard College. Brian, specific to this conference, is also the developer of the Gene Tutor app, which is available on iOS devices as well as Google and Android devices. Brian did all the development work himself, taught himself how to develop on these platforms. The app serves basically as a study guide for students in college-level genetics classes. Brian's done several versions of it, and I think it's been a great resource for students that are looking for a little bit extra help in the class. So with that, I'll let Brian explain a little bit more about his work there.
Thanks, Jay. Yeah, as Jay mentioned, I guess my view in this particular panel is from the faculty side, having tried to develop something that went through the technology ventures, and they've been a great help, because I think without that, it would have been a lot harder to reach that final stage. But really what it comes out of, as he mentioned, I developed this study app for genetics, and it arose out of something that was really just sitting around with other faculty members about a year ago. We were talking about the fact that we've all observed that all of our students view the world through their mobile devices now. This is what they're on all the time. And I made a crack that, geez, all I need to do is have all of my practice problems available on their iPhone, and maybe they'll be able to access them more easily. And over the next week, I thought about it, and I was on sabbatical. And I'm actually no longer chair now. It's kind of that was the other thing that enabled me to do this. I was on sabbatical, and I thought, and just as a caveat, I do have some programming background because I had programmed for some of my research. So I went in thinking, well, maybe I would be able to do this. And so I went through a basic process and thought to myself that what I really wanted to do was provide this basic study tool for students for their mobile devices. And as I thought about it, I decided to add study material. So just study notes that supplemented the textbook. Now, actually, I'll get to the last point. We can jump down to that. Is that even though I've done that, I've begun to think that I could probably get an entire textbook into this as well, and slowly replace the study material with actual explanatory material. But I also wanted to have set it up flexibly so that there's a platform, and then others, faculty, could just put their content into it. It would be a separate app, probably, but it would just be a matter of them having the content. I'm trying to convince a couple of my colleagues to do this now. We'll see if that happens. And finally, I thought if something that would, over time, grow into a really cheap, really inexpensive study tool and maybe book for the students. Now, I've just been doing this all on my own. I'm sure a lot of other people out there are thinking of similar things, and maybe other people have done this sort of thing. But just trying to develop from the ground up, if people are interested in having small apps for their courses, I found that it actually wasn't that difficult. However, it's not without its problems. As I started thinking about this about a year ago and I started to write it, you do have to become an Apple developer in order to do this. And all I did was I went out and I bought a book and learned how to program apps on the iPhone, and you can actually follow through these books and develop pretty basic apps quite easily. They do have a lot of structures set up so that you can get an app in place and then you just have to provide the content. But I will say, despite that and the fact that I have some programming background, it's frustrating at times because you'll hit these walls and just sit there and it should be doing something that they say it'll be doing, but it's not, because the book's about a previous version of the iOS and this and that. So there are moments when I felt like just chucking it all, but I stuck with it, and part of the reason is that there are these sites, stackoverflow.com is the one I put up there, but there are online forums for other developers in similar positions, and they'll post questions like, I can't get this to work despite what they say, and so we feedback, and they give examples of how they solved it, and you can work that in pretty well. So with that help, I actually got to the point where I could test it, and all of these mobile apps, they just, if you've never seen them, you develop it on your laptop, and then you can run it on a simulator and you test it, you run and see how it works. So you just eventually just run it and see how it goes. And I would say in terms of the basic app, it took me a few months working here and there to actually get the platform in place. The content took a lot longer. In fact, that's open-ended. I'm just continuing to develop more content so I can provide updates. But it did take a bit of time. And then I realized, of course, I should provide an Android version. So I went to that. And this is pretty much, I went through the same thing. I bought a book and I went through and I developed it. The problem with it is that Android as a system, as you probably know, Google has developed this Android system. So it runs on a variety of platforms. So a lot of different mobile devices will run an Android app. And that presents a challenge, at least for me as sort of a naive programmer, that there's no fixed screen size or really way in which it's displayed. So you write in a way that it'll be flexible enough to display on any of these devices, and that proves to be a bit challenging. Personally, I'm just going to target the Galaxies because I think those are the most popular, and I figure if it works on that, great. If it works on any other, it's just a bonus. And the other thing is that it is actually developed in a different programming language, and if you know enough about programming language, you kind of convert it, but you have to do that by hand. There's no way to take an Apple app and sort of just have it translate into an Android. So you do have to write it separately, and the simulator for Android is awful, in my opinion. It takes forever to launch. It does weird things. It crashes all the time for things that are not in your program. It just stops working. So Google really has to work on that. But you go through the same process. And really the challenges I found is that the programming isn't totally trivial. You do have to spend some time working on that. And I mean, if you develop a basic app, they have nice platforms for just having all those display items on these mobile devices. But to do anything more than a really basic thing takes a bit of time. And what I'm running into now is just that I haven't even approached Windows 8, but you have all these different platforms. So I have to write apps for the different platforms if I want as many students as possible to be able to utilize it. That's a little bit frustrating, I have to admit. So I'm probably going to write a Windows 8 app and just see where this goes over time. But the other headache I've run into is that these constant operating system updates, they changed just last week. Apple changed how iPad rotation is handled programmatically. So I had to change my app so that it rotates on the iPad. And it means that you're constantly keeping an eye on it and not just adding content, but making sure with the latest release, you have to download the new code, check your app on it, make sure it works, and then they keep deprecating functions, so I have to change that. So you do run into that. So I'm not sure where I'll go as a faculty member in terms of keeping with this, but I like the device. I had the students utilize it last semester, and they seem to love it. I don't think they were just lying. They've got a real real set of study tools in their hands at all times, and we're going to just keep testing it. And I've kept it fairly flexible, although it could increase in flexibility to some degree. I make a few assumptions about how the content's structured, which I could program out of that, so that anybody could upload basic content, kind of like you would to Courseworks, but it would just be in some way flexible enough to handle a variety of different data forms. And I was going to switch to the simulator to show you sort of how this actually goes. Let's see if we can get this functioning here. Just to give you an idea of what we mean in terms of launching the app. I'm not sure it's sized quite properly. It doesn't show on the screen, I noticed, but when it launches, this would just be on the iPad version, so I'll show you the iPad. So it just shows this, and one of my former students was very helpful in getting some things together, so this is Natalie. And the other thing I like about doing this, even though I'm sure there are companies out there that will be providing these sorts of platforms, I can make it kind of personalized to our college, and students this semester have been adding things that will go into the app. But you know, if you see it and it's, for some reason, I'm not sure exactly how to change the size on this, so I won't try, but you know, you can view it in landscape. But the basic idea is that the content's just read down in tables, and so students can either look at the study material or go into specific topics like Mendelian inheritance, and then there are subtopics that gives a little bit of a background. And then the core of it are these questions. And when we look at the questions, it gives it, which is going to be a little bit off here because of the size of it, but it gives these basic questions. Some of them are a lot longer than others. Some are open-ended, so there's no multiple choice, but there's a solution there, so students can try to answer the question. And then I had students get these pictures which sort of show, there's a whole bunch of them, that most of them involve others, some of the students, that the TAs in the course. So, you know, it gives it a sense the students, when they're studying, they're really part of this, the course generally. It goes back, and you can view solutions for that, and I let them flag these questions as well. And the flagging of the questions means that they can easily visit those at some point in the future. So once they've flagged questions back in the main table, they show up, and that'll show, so they can retrieve those. It keeps track of which ones they answered correctly, which ones they flagged, and the study material is basically just web browser. So they can go through all the content of the courses there, they can look at that, and it gives them all the basic study guides. And that actually originally I hadn't thought would be something I would put a lot into, but over time I've really grown a huge amount. So all the topics are here, so if they want to look at replication in eukaryotes, it shows all the material and then individual pages, and there are videos that are embedded within this, so they can view the videos if they're connected. But all of the content of the course is embedded in the app now, and all I have to do is update the app, and they've got this. And there are a few other tweaks to it. You can change the unflagged questions, and they can only see easy, medium, hard questions, and they can also shuffle questions if they want to do a test environment. They can run through them. So all the content's in there. The one thing that I'm looking at as a possibility for the future is allowing content updates over the web, so that they don't have to get the update of the app. I'm kind of going back and forth between, should all of the content be in the app so they can study on the subway without a trouble, or should it be web-based so I can update that without updating the app. That's the issue that you run into, but I may come up with a flexible intermediate in which they download updates off the web to the content, and then it just displays it. And then the other thing that I'd like to add at some point is just the ability for students to type in notes, add to the study content with their own notes, which is not too difficult, but I haven't spent the time programming that. So in terms of this, I found it actually really quite rewarding. It is a bit time consuming, and at times it's been frustrating, but once I got the app, Technology Ventures was great at getting it uploaded and getting it approved. Yeah, Apple, you have to upload your apps and then they approve them, or they don't approve them. So luckily mine was approved. But I've actually found it really great because the students can use this, and there's a real connection to the actual course with the pictures of other students. and they seem to like the fact that there's an app for their course, and they actually used it a great deal. So anyway, that's sort of my adventures in this field, and I'll hand it over to, or Jay will come in. Thanks. Let's just quickly see.
All right, and last but not least, we have Ben Moskowitz, who, in addition to working as a professor at NYU in the interactive telecommunications program, Ben is also the director of the Open Video Conference and kind of a thought leader on the open web and open online video in general, and has a great perspective on different models that are used to disseminate kinds of content on the internet and obviously through the web. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ben.
Thank you, and thanks very much for having me. I think I should say that first and foremost, I'm at Mozilla. I'm a bit of a dilettante when it comes to education, so the professor thing is sort of a hobby. It's a fun hobby. It's a good hobby. But I'm actually going to come at this more as a web person than an educator, because the web can be a pretty disruptive force, but I think that's generally a good thing. So I want to first talk about Mozilla and what Mozilla is. Mozilla is a social enterprise. It is a profit-generating corporation owned by a nonprofit philanthropic entity, the Mozilla Foundation. And so we don't have any shareholders. We don't have a profit motive. We're not trying to make a whole bunch of money. We're trying to further our mission. And our mission is to keep the web open and to keep it a place that's competitive and transparent and sort of preserves all the values of this theoretical construct called the open web. The really neat thing about working for an organization like Mozilla is that you can work on systemic change. So the products that we do and the initiatives that we do are valuable on their own, but we do them because they help us make systemic change. So in the case of Firefox, which is our main product, it's a web browser that's used by between 300 and 400 million people, depending on how you count. We're doing it because it gives us a lever on the open web, and it lets us be a voice and sort of a market shaper when it comes to things like privacy, for instance. And in terms of our work on things like open video, which I'll expand on, and web literacy, and assessment, and a lot of the things that we're working on, the products that we're doing are sort of interventions in the market that help us sort of advance our values. So I got started in this space because I became very interested in video on the web. And if you think about video on the web, it's a relatively new phenomenon. We've had, Macromedia, Flash, Shockwave, stuff like that for a long time, but YouTube, which is the thing that I think kicked it into overdrive, is like a 2006 phenomenon, right? So we're now in 2013. All the big tectonic shifts in the media and the way that we communicate are not that old. They're 6 or 7 years old. And at the time that I began working on this with some of the folks that are actually in this room, YouTube looked like it was going to be the be-all, end-all. And by that, it would be the one sort of centralized source of content. The technologies that deliver the content are relatively closed, and they're not open source, and they cost money to incorporate, which is problematic, I think. Because, text, if you think about text, you don't need to pay anybody to incorporate text into your app. Whereas video, if you're a provider of a video product or application or service or whatever, you need to pay to incorporate video into that. And so looking at some of these long-term issues around technology and around policy and how video gets delivered on the web and how people use video as a medium was sort of how I got into this. And we put together a conference called the Open Video Conference. It was multidisciplinary and was trying to look at some of these issues. And so that sort of led me into Mozilla, where I'm really fortunate to have the opportunity to sort of do what we do at Mozilla, which is to make products and to start initiatives that operate in the market that try to advance the values that we have. And so I just want to show you something really quickly that I've been working on for a little while, which is called Popcorn. How are we looking over there? And Popcorn's a really new product. We launched it in November of last year, and it's got a ways to go, I think, before it really catches on, but it's conceptually very neat. So the idea behind Popcorn is that you should be able to edit the web the way that you edit video. You should be able to take any content from the web, regardless of where it sits, and make a composition that looks like video and sounds like video and quacks like video, but is not video. And this is sort of in furtherance of the idea that you should be able to speak with video, right? So video should be something that you not only can read and consume, but something that you can write and sort of publish out. So I'm going to give an example, and this is one of many of the things you can do, but let's say that I am a film studies professor, and I'm teaching Hitchcock, and I'd like my students to critically engage with Hitchcock. I send them over to YouTube. And here's Young and Innocent. I'm not sure if this is the whole film or a trailer. But what I can do is I can grab this YouTube video just by copying it, head over to Popcorn, which is a web app, paste it in here, and now I have the Young and Innocent sitting on this stage here. So now I can start sort of critically engaging with this in a number of ways. And I can kind of jog through here in the environment. And I can do lots of interesting things. So I can sort of put annotations on here, right? And I can say something like, this is fascinating. You can tell that I didn't prepare a whole lot for this particular demo. I can also throw in images, right? So let's say that I want to throw an image of one of the actors here. This is actually the whole movie, so it's kind of unwieldy to edit the whole movie, I'm finding. I can say, go to Flickr and get images of Hitchcock. I want 10 images that meet the hashtag Hitchcock, and I want them to slide down. And I hit play here. And I've got a nice little slideshow that I can incorporate into here. So you can imagine lots of ways for students, or really anybody, to critically engage with video. And I could probably give you a better example, but I encourage you to use it yourself. It's popcorn.webmaker.org. And this is not just annotating video. This is theoretically creating a new video from scratch. I'll show you something that I did actually last night. I'm going to log in here. And I'll show you some of the projects that I've been sort of hacking on. I thought it would be pretty cool to visualize the sounds that your modem makes if you're in 1995 or 1986. So this is something that I made from scratch by taking the sound of a dial-up modem from Wikimedia Commons, finding this really awesome picture of the spectrogram, so like what are the tones basically, which I got from Google image search. Didn't really worry about licensing this, to be honest. And then sort of stepping through and trying to give a layman's explanation of what exactly is happening when these two modems are handshaking, right? And I'm using pop-ups and I'm using text. So this is an original composition that I've sort of stitched together from media across the web. And so this is a pretty powerful tool, conceptually. You can imagine doing lots of critical engagement around it, lots of assignments that could be designed around it. And one of the really great things about it is that it's totally web native. So you're not making a video that you're then flattening and putting on YouTube. This is a little mini web app that you've made that needs to be experienced in a web browser. And it can be shared in the same way that like a YouTube video can, but that player has all the instructions for how this thing works. And moreover, all those instructions are regular HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, right? So this is sort of a Trojan horse for teaching code literacy as well. For those people who go beyond the confines of the tool and they want to learn more and make more sophisticated things, there's a very easy ramp from being a maker in this environment to doing some of what we've heard about in terms of just getting a book and learning about how to code, which is sort of neat. So the one last thing I'd like to talk about before I let us get into a dialogue, because I'm conscious not to take us too far afield, is this idea of informal learning. And I know that we're here at Columbia, and most of what we're talking about today is learning that happens inside of an institution. Being from Mozilla and looking at sort of systemic change and the sort of scale of impact that we can have in the things that we do, we're really excited about informal learning. And it starts from this idea that we're an open source project. We've had 50 or 75,000 volunteers over the lifespan of the Firefox project come in and help us make that better by looking at the code, finding bugs, adding features. And it's interesting because a lot of people have picked up a lot of skills by participating in this open source project, but they're not getting recognized for them, right? So not only are they learning stuff that you might have to go and pay or take a class to get those skills. So not only are they learning, but they're also contributing in a really valid way. But because it's an open source project and we're not their employer and there's no formal relationship or formal accreditation, all of the work that they're doing is going unrecognized. So we're looking at different ways that we can look at informal learning and learning that happens everywhere, on the web, day to day, inside and outside of institutions, and trying to see how we can recognize that. And so we're working on some stuff that I'll be really happy to talk about, I think, when we're in the panel. But a tool like this can be interesting in an institutional context. It could be interesting in a classroom. I think it is even more interesting if you look at what this is letting us do writ large. And not only for education, but for how we interact with the media, how we sort of take part in these rich media that don't really have great authoring tools. We have really great consumption tools. We have really great ways of watching video and sharing video, but we don't really have great ways of making video or remixing video. And that's sort of, I think, the horizon that we're looking at. So thank you very much.
All right, so I think we have heard quite a bit about everybody's specific experiences in this field, across a broad range of disciplines between the three of our panelists here. So some of the things I'd like to talk about and kind of open a dialogue about are some of the general trends and the disruptive factors of some of these education technologies and some of these platforms that are being used now. And kind of the first question I'd propose, and it's open to anybody to answer. As you'll see, some of these questions are a little more directed at individuals, but this is open to everybody. When you're thinking about current trends in digital technology and education technology, what do you see amongst all the factors that are brought to the table by these new platforms? What do you see as the most disruptive and the most advantageous to these new platforms versus traditional classroom learning?
I think that building on what I was hinting at a moment ago, I think that learning happens everywhere, and so the tools that we use cannot be exclusively designed to take place inside of a classroom, right? I think that in general, when professors use things like Tumblr and and WordPress and things that are more woven into a student's everyday experience, it's really less painful for those students to go into the weird spaces that are specifically constructed to give them a curriculum and for them to engage with their peers. And so I think one of the things that will be disruptive but also better and I think more effective from the student perspective is sort of looking at the tools that are writ large web tools for communication and not trying to exclusively use things like LMS systems and specially designed apps, and that's not at all a criticism. The things that do work really well, but I think that the macro trend is going to be towards more sort of openness and more data portability and stuff like that.
Does anybody else have anything to add, or I can move on to another question? Brian?
Well, I've been trying to think about it. I'm not really quite sure.
Okay.
Because different classrooms are very different. And in science classrooms, we don't use a lot of platforms that others do. And so I haven't run into a lot of in-classroom use of technology beyond the eye clickers. I think it's just a very different environment than a lot of classes that are bringing in a lot more this sort of technology into it. So I can't think of anything that I have found disruptive in the class, other than students doing things that are the modern equivalent of passing notes under the table. But that's going to happen regardless, right?
Great. The next thing that I kind of wanted to talk about and hit on a little bit going forward.
Actually,
go ahead. Yeah.
If you don't mind, I think that I was just thinking about that, and I think you're absolutely right. I think within the classroom, it may be that there aren't things that are terribly disruptive, because for the most part, you still go to a classroom to learn from someone who's incredibly accomplished as an academic. But what I think we should look at is, again, the learning that happens outside the classroom every day, day after day, and at least in the educational experiences I've had, most of my learning style, and perhaps looking at students who've grown up on Wikipedia and being able to Google and get an immediate answer for everything, the sort of constructivist approach that they're going to have towards understanding the world and the things that they're supposed to be learning will happen more on the internet, arguably, than it will in the classroom. And so the opportunity is not necessarily what can you put into the classroom while they're there. To sort of be more effective, but how can you...
I was thinking just in the classroom, but yeah, when you step outside, I think all of us experience a lot of things. You mentioned Wikipedia, which is great and horrible at the same time. I now find myself, whenever I'm going to talk about a subject in my genetics class, I go to Wikipedia and check how the terms are used, because I know that students will be reading that and I want to know what they're seeing. So I have to keep up with that. So that's one. It is somewhat disruptive, but there are great things about it too. Often some of the pages are wonderful. So yeah, I would agree. Outside the classroom, it's quite different.
Oh, I was just going to say, with the iHuman patients, it's not just a technology, but we're intentionally trying to disrupt the way that medical education is delivered and make substantially all of it. Well, you can't do that. You have to have the human interaction at the patient level as much as possible delivered virtually, because there's a huge shortage of medical providers. We don't have the infrastructure to educate. We're woefully short globally on clinical resources. And so tools like 3D anatomical reconstruction are embedded in the tool, accessible through the web, right? So you can basically zap your cadaver and dissect it virtually in a 3D environment. And I think what's going to change is that would allow time compression. Who says medical school has to be 4 years if you could absorb the material faster? The AMA is working on that now, I know, because we were just there. The role of the teacher, the role of faculty, what is a submersive environment versus what's delivered virtually, I think is all going to be disrupted. And it's not just a technology, it's coming. People are investing millions of dollars on it right now, and it's going to disrupt the current models and the way education is delivered.
So I saw we had a question. Do you mind if there's a couple more things we want to get through, and then I'm going to leave some time for questions at the end. But the next thing, kind of leading into that, based on the last question, there's always this tension between, where are these different kinds of dissemination models effective for education, and where are they at odds? And one of the things that I see is constantly being at odds is, accreditation and the value of a certificate versus a degree. And I see that as kind of a large hurdle for a lot of these web-based platforms and alternative learning methods and things like that. Just wanted to know, what are your opinions on kind of how that will flesh out in the future, as far as seeing different kinds of credits that you get from alternative learning being assigned higher values when people are, for instance, looking for a job or anything like that. So
somebody smart, and maybe you can help me find the person who made this quote, said you can't get out of a problem using the same thinking. Was that Einstein? Who said it was? You can't get out of a problem by using the same thinking that created it, right? But that's exactly what we're doing, so hopefully we'll still succeed. We're working with MacArthur Foundation on a system for recognizing skills that you earn either in a formal or an informal learning setting. And it's called the Open Badge Infrastructure. So the idea is that for anyone who believes that they can teach a skill or a competency, either at the level of like, I understand long division, or at the level of I've graduated with a degree in molecular biology, you design a system that will assess how well, or if at all, the student has acquired those things, and then you cryptographically sign, meaning like you generate like a web-based sort of semi-permanent key that says, this institution confirms that this person has learned this thing. And it's represented by a badge. Right? So it's a technical solution to the problem you're identifying, which is, if I go to Columbia University and I get a degree, I'm always going to have the diploma, and I can always write the office, and they can confirm that I have that diploma, right? We want to give that same thing, which is, you can show and you can guarantee, because the cryptographic, sorry, I'm being very technical, because of the way that it's signed, that this institution says that this person has gotten this skill, and we're trying to instantiate that in the Open Badge infrastructure. So it's a multi-year project, and you can learn more about that. But I think that at this stage there are 150 systems that have been designed through the kind of MacArthur-Mozilla collaboration. So we're really enthusiastic, and we want to see where that goes. But we recognize that it is solving a technology problem with technology, so we'll have to see.
Right. And kind of, being a little bit selfish here with my own interest as a member of CTV, the tech transfer role in the context of the university is traditionally been to protect IP and seek licensing agreements. Obviously, open source licensing is vastly important as far as disseminating new stuff. But there's ways in which people have explored kind of using a mixed hybrid model, like dual licensing and add-ons and things that are cost-based support to open source content. Are those things that either of you have any experience with, or have seen any of those models kind of play out in the commercial context?
I think there's a difference between the content side of this and the sort of frameworks and tools side of this. For my part, I'm more interested in the frameworks and tools side of this. I think that in general, like, we should have a more permissive culture towards how we view copyright, and especially citations and transformative work and remix and stuff like that. But I don't feel, unfortunately, too qualified to talk about the business models, because, I'll reveal my true colors. It's not something that I go to bed worrying about. And I realize that I should, but I sort of come at it from the perspective that, like, if we have good tools and frameworks, then people will be industrious, and the institutions that are creating the content and viewing it as a source of revenue will find ways to continue doing so. So I have faith, but I think maybe these gentlemen have.
Yeah, so kind of a good follow-up for that would be a question for Tim. Do you see kind of the role of the Technology Transfer Office evolving to kind of meet these new ways that content is being potentially available in multiple different platforms and often under an open source license, and how would the university still be able to derive value where it should, and still provide broad access where it also should, and kind of meet both demands?
Well, yeah. Very similar to what you were saying, I think that the university's mission is to disseminate its knowledge. And in some cases, that requires a funding model that requires a customer to pay, right? Or someone who's consuming the technology versus being able to get it from philanthropic sources, certainly, or tuition revenue. So we should be indifferent to the channels. What we should really be focused on is, can we create enduring impact that's self-sustaining, maintaining, and can move forward and have global impact? And I think that's going to change what we do as universities, as in tech transfer. Is, let's not talk about who owns what. Let's talk about how can we create global impact and improve the lives of people by creating tangible products and services, and do it in a way that allows the funds to be there to make the project move forward. And that's the key. And however that comes to the funding, then as a university, as alumni, as people that are engaged in the institution, we need to align around how to fund that and make it happen. And so that's easy to say, much harder to do, but all of us, my personal feeling, and I was an education entrepreneur I've been around this a long time. Universities have an opportunity to lead like we've never had an opportunity before. The barriers are breaking down where instead of having a McGraw-Hill or an Elsevier or someone else being an intermediate, we can go directly to the marketplace and impact the world. And brand, the ability to use evidence, you said it, but I'd come back. Click by click, you can track what your student is doing. The computer can come back and tell you, here's what they understood, here's what they didn't understand. You can do adaptive learning, active learning, immediate assessment, get it all summarized and back to you so that you can intervene where you need to intervene, and use your incredible influence as a faculty member to help people really focus on complex issues and problems that they're struggling with. And so I'm really passionate about this for our universities. We need to be thinking about this as being leaders, and that's what I would say. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the last thing I give a damn about is, do we have a license with something? Are we going to get some kind of royalty? How do we get this out there and make it happen? And how do we make it fundable and allow the funding to continue to make the products and services endure? So that's not helpful in a way, but no, I just, these tools give us evidence. Who better to use evidence than the faculty at major universities, right? To improve outcomes. It's really an exciting time.
So kind of to piggyback off that, as Brian mentioned, we worked pretty closely on some of the updates to his app. It was developed prior to my initially joining CTV. But a question for Brian with regard to the developing role of university resources for faculty that are trying to do these kinds of projects, tech transfer resources that are provided as well. Is there anything that you would have wished was available to you as a faculty member, or different approach that you would have wished we could have taken as a university, and how would you kind of, if you could model your ideal system for doing some things in the future, what dramatic things would be different?
Well, it's going to sound silly, but the fact is that I had no problem. I think it's great, but I'm coming from a very limited perspective. I wrote an app and I wanted it put up, so there's not any large reaching implications. If this is sort of, we're talking about these platforms that'll be available and evolving content, and I agree. I think having something where, as I mentioned, in an app, what I've actually considered is the fact that if you have a platform like this, I may not develop all of the content, but rather it'll become more like a wiki where faculty from other institutions all contribute to content, and it just goes into it, and it can change all the time, and that's where I see it going if it continues to be used. So until that, I guess getting back to the idea that app development is challenging, so if it's going to become something, then there needs to be a way in which faculty can interact with people who know how to do this. I find in terms of once it was in place, everything went very smoothly. If it's going to be something where the university is interested in having this, then the tech centers basically, kind of like the IT, need to have these teams that can allow a faculty to develop the content more than the platform itself.
All right. Oh, we're running out of time here, so I did want to get to the question.
How about I just make an announcement and then people can stay around in here?
Sure. Okay, yeah, great.
We're going to let the Q&A take place here in just a moment. I just wanted to notify the audience that if anybody is registered for the Leaders Forum at 12:30, it is taking place in the boardroom right now. That's registration only. We're technically on our lunch right now, but nothing is happening in this room, so we can continue to do a Q&A here for as long as you guys are comfortable staying. Okay?
Thanks. Okay, so with that, I know that there was at least one question in the audience. If you'd like.
A couple of things.
Sure.
First, just quick.
Yeah. Do you want to? You might. Yeah.
Sure, from New Jersey Institute of Technology. One quick question I had was, don't some of these course management systems have enabled mobile apps? I wish they would. They should, because those I, for example, have developed materials in the course management system with questions and similar study guides and things. And if that could just be ported over from the course management system. I know I work in the library at NJIT, and we ported the library website over to a mobile app. So it seems like somebody is writing this somewhere.
I'm sure.
Did you investigate it?
Yeah.
No, maybe not.
No.
Okay. Okay. Then the other thing I just wanted to quickly say was, you asked at the beginning of the discussion about what is transformative, and a lot of these things are very nice and they're helpful to students, these applications and putting the materials up inside the learning management system or in an app. That's very helpful, but in essence, you can tell I'm a librarian, it's really just still a book with questions, a book with answers. And I have been involved in some things that I thought maybe some people would find interesting, because I think they are more transformative, and that is, if we understand the educational trend where the student must do something to learn, okay, so we're flipping the classroom, as they call it. I have used an assignment where the students have to write a Wikipedia article, and they also must engage with the community of writers who write on there, who edit that article that they have picked to edit, so that they have to have some social interaction on the back end of Wikipedia. I'm going to put up this. What do you guys think? You know, people take stuff down. It's really a community. It's quite interesting. And then the students are writing for Wikipedia and the world rather than the professor. And that has been very transformative. So I think that's an interesting application of the technology.
Well, I mean, to kind of address a little bit of your first question, I mean, there are some initiatives, obviously, to convert more things to HTML5-based sites that are dynamic and can be accessed without going through, iTunes and having to formally download an app that's natively installed on a device. I mean, there are initiatives to do that. I don't know, where they're at and how broad it is university-wide, but it is something that's definitely being explored, definitely being thought about. The question now, as Brian definitely touched on, is how much of the content needs to be embedded in the app and how much of it can be accessed anywhere, and that comes down to how quickly do you want to be able to update it, and there's a lot of considerations that go along with that. But that's really the kind of the tension right now is, should we put all this into individual modules that have to always be downloaded in new versions, or can we make it something that's very dynamic and being quickly updated just by an administrative back end?
I think in some cases you can have your cake and eat it too. So as long as you're not distributing like really heavy, rich media files, if it's mainly text and stuff like that, you can use app cache, and there's techniques that you can use in the mobile app space.
And I think Brian touched on a little bit about having kind of an intermediate solution that downloads, information and stores it for offline access. So, so does anybody else have any other questions?
Hi, hi, my name is Ichin, and so maybe my question is a little bit more directed towards Ben. So our center is responsible for training professionals, and we have an LMS system, learning management system, but there's sort of challenges within that because we're limited by the proprietary system. So my question is sort of like thinking about how our center and our LMS will be relevant, say, a few years down the road, and what's sort of the trend maybe in the open source community in terms of, really looking at the transcript data, and what we're really interested in is the outcome data. Are our trainings effective, and in terms of like evidence-based practices? So if you could elaborate on that, that'd be great.
Sure. I think the LMS is serving two constituencies, right? It's serving the learners and it's serving the educators. And if it is doing that effectively, I think stick with it regardless of whether it's proprietary or open source. The challenge is a long-term one where over time, institutions come to rely and come to be tied to certain vendors in some ways, and that's when it becomes incredibly problematic. And it's not just in education; it's any sort of software as a service that serves a specific industry. So in journalism, right? You have, newsrooms that are crippled, absolutely crippled by the reliance on a content management system, right? Which is a very similar situation. So I think I believe that it falls sort of on the campus-wide institutions that are responsible for like charting the long-term strategy. If it's working now, there's no need to be a vegan about a paid proprietary learning management system if it does its job well. But it's that longer-term risk that I think people need to look out for.
Right. So, like you were mentioning, the open badge sort of project, are there sort of data that's being tracked on analytics, within that project or platform?
The Open Badge project is very simple. It's solving a very specific problem, which is guaranteeing that this person learned this thing from this institution. So it's closer to a diploma than anything else. In that sense, it's like a certification.
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay, so unfortunately I think we're out of time here, but thanks everybody for coming. Thank you very much for the panelists.